Hola chicos, hoy es miércoles el 18 de marzo 2020. And today I'm actually going to give you a lesson on stem changing verbs. Now you've been learning about stem changing verbs and you've already learned two different stem changes. One was e to the IE, like in quiero, and the other one was o to the UE, like puedo or duermo. And so now we are looking at the same type of stem changing, except it's verbs that go from E to the I. And so many of you already have either copied down the Cornell notes that I posted on Google Classroom, or you've printed them out. Either way, I'm happy with either of the two, as long as you are referring to them as as you're watching this video. So I'm going to start with the essential question, and then at the very end, I'm just going to wrap up as far as anything that perhaps may have come up as a question. Now, if you really do have questions as you're watching this video, you can post those questions as long as they're relevant to the notes or anything to do with the verbs that I'm going over on the comment section of Google Classroom. If it's more of a, I really don't understand, I'm trying to do this activity where the verbs go from E to the I, and it's more specific, you can go ahead and just message me on Remind. Okay, let's start. The essential question. Oh, see, I have my notes up there. So if you see me looking up to the left, is because I'm referring to the notes so that I can, follow along. So I can actually go in the order in which you're following along and you wrote them. Okay. So here we go. So how do you form stem changing verbs from E to the I? And so one of the cool things about E to the I verbs, because I remember this question came up, was, well, how do I know when they change from O to the UE? How do I know when they change from E to the IE? And it was one of those questions that I answered and basically said, well, you kind of learn to recognize those verbs over time. Well, these are the same, with the exception that these are IR verbs that basically just end in IR. And so you don't need to be looking at like, oh, is this a verb that changes from an E to the I and it has an ending of AR or ER? No, these are simply IR verbs. Okay, so that's the cool thing, because all you're looking at is only a few, it's not too many, and you have the list of those in your notes as well. So same thing, same rule as in your other stem changing verbs, is that the stem does not change in nosotros or vosotros. Yay, we know that already because you've been tested on stem changing verbs, and you know that I probably docked you points if you changed the stem instead of leaving it alone. So instead of saying podemos, you would say podemos. Okay, now that we remember that, it's also written in your notes. It says, for E to the I stem changing verbs, the last E of the stem changes except nosotros and vosotros. So you're like the last E. Remember when I told you it's the E that is right, it's from right to left, starting from the infinitive. So it's the verb ends in IR and you move to the left. Guess what? That first E right there is the one that you change. Because as you can see in some of the verbs that I've given you, there's two E's in the verb. Okay, so let me continue. How do you form the present tense of those verbs? Well, let's start with the verb servir. Servir means to serve. And that's like, okay, why are we talking about to serve? Well, if you remember this unit and if you look at some of the vocab, the theme is about restaurants, about food, about eating. That's why I had you guys go and explore all the different restaurants and the different foods, actually, not restaurants, and in Latin American foods. And so those were the things that I wanted you guys to kind of get familiar with so that you could see the theme and understand why the verbs were related to the unit. Not the unit, sorry, the chapter. So let's start with servir. So as you can see, the E, and there's only one E in servir here, you go ahead and you basically take out that E and replace it with an I. So it's yo sirvo, tú sirves, él, ella, usted sirve, and then we get to nosotros. And look at that, it stays as an E. And that's because, again, the rule applies. Nosotros, vosotros, they stay as an E and they don't change to an I. However, please pay attention that in the nosotros, the ending is imos. So you guys have been learning the endings on AR verbs, ER verbs, IR verbs now for quite some time. So you know the endings. So we don't really need to review the endings because they're the same. All we're doing is changing the stem and we're not doing anything different. So the endings for IR verbs are O, ES, E, IMOS, and EN. Okay, so my first example says, El camarero sirve la comida. And that basically translates to, the waiter serves the food. And so again, you can see that the E changed to an I and it's just SIRVE because it's an L, right? Because camarero is el. And so we know what the subject pronoun is. So then that's how you would actually go ahead and use the verb servir in a sentence. Now let's move on to the verb pedir. Pedir means to order or to ask for. And so this verb is really important that you follow the rule because you could end up saying something pretty funny, and if someone speaks Spanish, they would probably laugh at you. And I'll tell you why. Okay, so let's start with the yo. Yo pido un refresco. So that's your first example. Now, let's hypothetically say that you forgot that this was a stem changing verb. Well, you would actually be saying something like, I fart a soft drink. And that would actually sound pretty funny. And so it would also be, it actually wouldn't be grammatically correct. So it would still sound funny though. So you don't leave it as an PEDO because that means fart in Spanish. And you don't want to actually be caught saying that or people will just probably laugh at you. But you don't want that to happen. So anyways, it's E changing to an I. Okay, now let's look at the second example. And the second example says, we always order a salad. And then notice that the E stayed the same. You don't change it because, again, it's in the nosotros form. So you leave it alone. Okay, so just going really quickly through the whole little chart here that we have on pedir. Again, pedir means to order or to ask for, and it's yo pido, tú pides, él, ella, usted pide, nosotros pedimos, vosotros pedís, ellos, ellas, ustedes piden. Okay? So that basically sums up the E to the I, which is fairly easy if you pretty much understood the basic rules for E to the IE, the O to the UE, and now we have E to the I. Now you might be a little concerned that given these times, and I'm having to teach this to you on YouTube, I would do my best. I would look over the notes that you've had in the last couple of weeks, looking at your stem changing verbs, trying to recognize the ones that change. And if you make mistakes, you know, it's still always a learning experience. You're going to be learning these again throughout the rest of this year or perhaps at the beginning of next year. So you'll definitely get an opportunity to still practice them, but it's good for you to practice them now. So I will definitely post a couple of activities online so that you can practice the E to the I. And that's about it. That's the end of this lesson. I just want to say continue watching the videos that I put up there. Continue looking at the notes that I put up there and the activities that I recommend that you do. And just continue to be checking on Google Classroom so that I can, keep you up to date as to what's going on. Okay? Adios, chicos.